Hello, this is Nicole, and this is Pretty Amazing People podcast. Today is a special episode. I feel really honored to have spent time talking to this extraordinary man. He's written two must-read books. They should be required in schools, and people that know me have actually said, I don't need to read it, Nicole. I've told them everything. I talk about them all the time. I highly recommend. The first book I'm going to quote in his words: The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. The result of my soul searching and fact finding, which describes my journey as well as that of my family. I went from being a young Israeli patriot, eager to serve in the Israeli army, to a man questioning the very legitimacy of a Jewish state that was established in an Arab country where the majority of the population are not Jews, but Palestinian Arabs. This was from his second book, Injustice, which he told me will make me cry even more because this story actually makes him cry. Last night, I heard him talk about how painful the change was for him. It began after a tragic incident, which we're going to discuss, that started this journey of learning. And he talks about being in the discussion groups. And when he started hearing the other side of this story, it was like people telling him day was night, night was day. Was his whole world a lie? And it was very painful. And that's, I think, one of the things I love about the book is you feel the journey. I hope you listen to the entire episode and share. I'm going to talk about more from the books after my discussion with today's guest. He's a writer, a speaker. Go see him if he's somewhere near you, and a human rights activist, Miko Peled. Hello, Miko. Thanks for being here.
Sure. Happy to be with you.
Thank you. So, I'm a big fan of your books, and thank you for sharing your story. And I thought I would ask you a little bit about injustice. I'm half Palestinian, and I kind of started just starting to learn about our heritage within the last 10 years. And somebody introduced me to you a couple years ago. And then I became like everybody I know, I talk about your books.
Thank
And
you.
as you can see, I'm still reading this one because I can't read your books like a normal book. I highlight, I study it, and get a quote from it.
Good.
And then I want to talk about the General's Son. So, would you share Injustice and what made you tell that story? Like, I know why you told the General's Son, but Injustice, what made you tell that story? And tell us about the story.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me again. So I was the reason I decided to tell the story of this injustice is because of the horrible injustice that is entailed within the book, that exists within the story, and also because of the shock that I received when I heard the story, and I could only assume everybody else who doesn't live in the world that I exist in, which is the injustice that is carried out against Palestinians everywhere. If I was shocked by it, and I was more than shocked, it was disbelief. Then I can only imagine how others, and I thought this is an important story for people to know. And there's this assumption that there's a justice system in America that applies to everyone. And the reality in America is, and as I was working on the book, I discovered this more and more, particularly as I was talking to Black Americans and Americans of other minorities, that there's never been an expectation of justice when you are part of that other world that is not the white privileged world. And so that was an interesting lesson for me. But basically, I was in Texas. I was in Dallas, the University of Texas, and I was speaking about the General Senate. It had just come out, and it was an event organized by Students for Justice in Palestine. And some of the organizers were the daughters of these men. So after the lecture, they came and started telling me the story, which was, confusing. hard to believe, hard to understand. And then one of the people that was in the audience worked very closely with the people involved, and he said, "Look, I can send you all the material." And this was just as they were appealing their convictions, and their appeal had just been denied, I think, and they were appealing in front of the full circuit court, because the appeal process, first you appeal in front of three, and then you appeal in front of the entire court. And so the story is about five men who were involved with what used to be the largest Muslim charity organization in America, the Holy Land Foundation. It was a much loved, much respected, much trusted relief organization. Their focus was Palestine and Palestinians who needed relief. But they, I mean, they were there. They were some of the first responders after the Oklahoma City bombing, when there were natural disasters. They were in Europe after earthquakes. They were there after 9/11. I mean, they were small relatively, but they were, always there. And after 9/11, there was a need. The Bush administration needed somebody to blame, and they needed to demonstrate that they were somehow curtailing the terrorist network.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they literally, and I mentioned this in the book, and I quote actually, people in the administration who were told, we need to round up the usual suspects. Well, a relief organization run by Palestinian Muslims sending relief to Palestine. Well, that's the top of the, top of the list, right? They top the list. So 9/11 was September. By December, President Bush needed to announce something. So they scrambled, and on December the 4th, which is very, very short, very quickly, he announced that a major terrorist network was closed down. A terrorist that was an organization, a network that was funding Hamas,
Yes.
and then had been designated as a terrorist organization. And they were closed down, their assets were frozen. And then, I'll shorten the story, obviously, but they appealed it, that they tried to fight it in court because there was no basis there was no foundation for claims. There was no proof. 8 years later, two men who were very much involved, who were the founders and ran the organization, plus three others who were nominally involved, were found guilty of material support for terrorism, for Hamas, even though, again, there was all the evidence showed that they did nothing of the kind. It's not just that there was not enough evidence to prove what was being said about them. There were mountains of evidence shown that they did nothing, they did everything right. And in the process of writing the book, I read over 20,000 pages of court documents. And if I could, I'd publish them all, because you need to really read the transcripts to believe what went on in that courtroom. And two of them, Shukri Abu Bakr and Hassan Ilashi, who were the ones who were the most involved. Shukri ran the organization, Hassan was the president, received sentences of 65 years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And Mufid Abdul Qadir, who was just a volunteer, nominally involved, ended up 20 years. He should be released this year. And the other two, Abdurrahman Odeh received 15 years. Again, he was just a volunteer. He volunteered on missions. He donated a little bit. And Abu Ibrahim Muhammad al-Mazain, both of them received 15 years. Both of them are released. Abdurrahman is a released convict, a returned inmate. He can't open a business. He can't go to work. He can't open a bank account. He can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And Muhammad al-Mazain, he was in the process. His naturalization process has not ended, so they froze it, denied him, obviously. When his family came to pick him up when he was released, they were told that they're not going to see him. He was immediately transferred to an ICE facility for a year and then deported. And I recently saw him actually in Istanbul.
Oh.
So that's it. And again, Mufid Abdul Qadir is supposed to be released this year, and the other two, 65 years. I mean, so it's an unbelievable story unless you are familiar with just how corrupt the justice system is and how racist it is. And so it's yeah, and unjust it is. So anyway, so I thought I have to write this book. I mean, I just had to write the book. There was no question in my mind. And so I developed some really strong relationships and friendships with the families. I traveled to Palestine and spoke to people they worked with in Palestine. I met their lawyers, and I met 4 out of the 5 in prison. I traveled around the country to meet them in prison, communicated with them as much as possible. And that's the story. It's Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. That's what they're called.
The injustice. And I like how you connected, because you talk about from the general son, where your journey began, you growing up in the Zionist family, your father being a general, grandfather signing the Declaration of Independence. And I was kind of curious, your journey, I know, began with the death of would you share that about your niece, where your journey began? And how did that change you, like from becoming pro wanting Israel to once you started learning the truth, like how your life changed?
So, I was raised in could be probably described as a liberal Zionist family, although, it was a military family. It was a family with family members all around who were deeply, deeply connected to the vision of Zionism, to the work that was done before the state of Israel was established, and then running the state for the first few decades. And, but because of the work my father did after he retired from the military, he retired from the military after 1967. In 1968, he was one of the generals who planned and orchestrated and executed the war of 1967. So, he believed in a two-state solution. He was one of the first Israelis to promote it, and he paid dearly just for that.
Yeah, the general peace.
Yeah, exactly. And then general turned peace promoter, or what we want to call it. And then, and I was not really involved at all in activism, although I had my opinions, and I felt that it was inside me. And then in September of 1997, the summer and fall of 1997 were very, very violent. There was a lot of bloodshed. Israeli buses were being blown up. There was a huge bombing in a market in Jerusalem on the Jewish side, on the Israeli side, and so on. And then there was this explosion where in West Jerusalem, in central Jerusalem, shopping district. And my 13-year-old niece was there with her friends when 3 young Palestinians decided to blow themselves up and take several others with them, including this little girl and her friends. And so I always say that big shifts in our consciousness happen as a result of something terrible. Usually that's just human nature seems to be. And I've heard this from other people as well.
We don't change when things are good, is what I say.
We don't change unless we have to. And so that began for me a journey of exploration. Why, how do you explain? I mean, how do you explain something like this? How do you wrap your head around something like this? I mean, we've grown so accustomed to talk about violence and move on. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, like a whole chain of things that never ends. And what I say is, let's slow down for a minute. Let's talk about this one event that happened so many decades ago already, where 3 young men decided to kill themselves and take innocent civilians who they didn't know with them. Let's think about this horror, the reality that was created in that country that brought that situation to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began this, I was living in the US already at the time. So after the funeral and everything, I returned, and I just began this journey of looking for people to talk to. And the people that I was able to meet, I was living in San Diego at the time, were Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this new phenomenon of living room dialogue groups. And so I joined one of them. And I began to talk to Palestinians, to meet with Palestinians, to hear Palestinians for the first time in my life. And having been born and raised in Jerusalem, which is supposedly a mixed city, people don't realize just how segregated and how racist the city is.
Yes.
And that was the, once you embark on a journey where you actually meet people, you're introduced to them, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that I have to, give them a lot of credit. The way they welcomed me, the way the generosity with which they treated me, and so on, helped me to take these very difficult steps from, removing myself from this truth that I not only knew personally because of my family's involvement, but I believed in very strongly, to a point where I had to evaluate my life and my values and my identity, and then take this step into rejecting Zionism, calling for the end of Zionism, and calling for a single democracy with equal rights on all historic Palestine, from the river to the sea. So that's the short version of
Yeah.
the journey.
Well, it's yeah, and well, you write so beautifully. Like I feel like your compassion and your passion for Palestine. And this is why I needed you here, because I live in a world, my dad was also born in Jerusalem. And I believe Western media as well. Even when this happened, I'm taking Arabic, and my Egyptian teacher had to explain who Hamas was to me, So everybody here, I now know that when I'm talking to people, especially now, I can't talk to people because it's a whole nother, information. I've even been told, Nicole, you're wrong. And it's like they don't know what Palestinians are like. We're the ones who are the aggressors. We are this. So I want you to share what you discovered and what you learned, and how they really do live, and the lies that we're fed here.
So, in injustice, because the Holy Land Foundation was accused of material support to Hamas specifically, I took, I spent quite a bit of time in the book explaining what Hamas is, how it was established, who established it, what they did, and so on. So people have so it's actually, I think, a good resource for people who want to know about Hamas, because there's quite a bit in that book explaining what Hamas is. So I think it's important because of all these crazy stories about how Hamas was established, who supported, who didn't support, So the information I have in that book comes from the most reliable sources, Palestinian sources.
And they have to
Uh,
be open, right? Because people don't seem to really want to hear it. Do you
well, of
find
course,
that?
you have to be open to learn. Of course, you have to be willing to hear and overcome. And even Palestinians very often buy into the demagoguery and the propaganda that Israel puts out there, because so much of it has been around for so long that people treat it as truth. People even who are, very dedicated to justice and so on, repeat the lies about how Hamas was established and how Israel supported it and all that kind of nonsense. I don't even want to repeat it. But so anyway, so the book is a good resource. That particular book, Injustice, is a good resource for people who want to know about Hamas.
I hear I heard you recently talk about how we are all basically Zionists. So explain the difference of how it's not about faith. It's not about Judaism. It's not, it's that big misconception. I feel like if we're standing for Palestine, we're automatically accused of being anti-Semitic.
Right.
So,
Well, it makes sense, and I'll tell you why. Americans receive a Zionist education. So
right.
Americans, whether they know it or not, are Zionists. They know about Israel, they know about the Jews, they know about the Bible, they know about the Holocaust, they know about Israel, they know about the movie Exodus. I mean, if you look at the school books, textbooks, social studies books, culture, movies, politics, news, media, I mean, you name it, anywhere you go, what Americans are learning, and not only Americans, it's true in other countries too, they receive a very, very fundamentally a Zionist education. If you walk down the street, you talk to people, you say, I'm from Israel. They go, oh, I love Israel. We love Israel. If you say Palestine, they go, Pakistan? Where?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the people who do know that there's a Palestine know very little. They know there's some terrorism. They know there's some war. They know, now they know maybe a little bit more, but that's there's no context. So here we are I'll give you an example. We come up and we say, we need to boycott Israel. Why would you boycott the only Jewish state in the world? You must be anti-Semitic. We call for the elimination of the Zionist state, which is an apartheid state, and the creation of a democracy with equal rights. Well, you want to kill Jews, you want to get rid of the only Jewish state. That's the context that the Americans have.
Mhm.
So I think where we were failing is we haven't figured out how to close that gap. Now, granted, the other side, the Zionists have been doing this for over 100 years,
Okay.
and a lot of resources, and there are people don't even begin to appreciate how many Zionist organizations work tirelessly in their cities, in their local counties, in city councils, in school boards. I mean, there's not an elected official anywhere in America on any level that does not receive, once they are elected or once they're running for office. And again, it starts with school boards, an even deeper, Zionist connection than what Americans get anyway. So people need to come to terms with that. Now, what the Zionists did is very early on, and again, this is my grandparents and my parents' generation. They said this whole notion that Jews are a religion is nonsense. Jews are a nation like other nations. They have a history. Their history is the Bible. The Old Testament is our history. Of course, we know that anybody who claims the Bible is a history has got to be out of their mind. It's a book of faith. And Palestine is their country, and they were kicked out of their country. Now they're returned, and there was an injustice that has now been, put to, fixed. Jews and Judaism. This is let me put it this way. This is completely contrary to Jewish law.
Right.
According to the very tenets of Judaism, Jews are a religious minority that have no common culture, no common language, no common land.
Mm-hmm.
They have common aspirations to one day go and pray in the Holy Land because it's a holy land. And one day, when the Messiah comes, when the Almighty gives us permission, and so on and so on, we will all go to the Holy Land and worship together, and there will be no more wars and on. So the Zionists said this is all nonsense. We're a nation. We need to take up arms. And by the way, the whole notion of taking up arms and trying to hasten the return rather than waiting according to the religious law is, again, it contravenes Jewish law. The whole idea of Zionism. So but the Zionist propaganda is so powerful.
Yes.
Because mostly Christian evangelicals have been really pushing forward the same message since the middle of the 19th century. This is not something that Jewish Zionists invented, actually. The idea of a country without a people for a people without a country is a Christian idea. So anyway, because of all these different factors, they were very successful, and because they didn't look Jewish, they shaved their beards, they were Western, they spoke many languages. They're all, my grandfather, this whole group of, Zionist diplomats, if you will. They spoke many languages. They traveled around the world. I mean, they were, charming people, and so it was hard to argue with them. There's something that they could be anything but, and they espoused, Eurocentric values. So that's the difference. Now today, nobody knows this unless, and this is a journey that I've taken recently, you delve into the world of ultra-Orthodox Judaism and understand why they are so opposed, why ultra-Orthodox Jews to this day reject Zionism and reject the Jewish state, the idea of a Jewish state. Unless you get into that, you don't know. And Americans don't know because they receive a Zionist education. And by the way, the Zionist organizations are trying to infiltrate into the education institutions of the most ultra-Orthodox communities now in order to Zionize them. And they do the same thing in Palestine, because in Palestine there are still, communities that predate the state of Israel. They were traditionally anti-Zionist. And so there's a push to get them into the army, because the army is a great place to lose your religion and to become a Zionist. So that's the process. But again, this is something that people need to know, and they don't.
Yeah, I know. I see more Jewish people against this too. And then can you share again the misconception of how they live? They don't have freedom. West Bank, I have friends. I was talking to a friend the other day. They didn't get to go pray their Eid prayer. The army's there. They are just living in fear. And again, it is not because they did anything. It's always been like that. This did not start October 7th. And just share the truth. I mean, they live under occupation, but people don't seem to hear that. They just keep saying, that we started it. That's all I hear. So tell the truth.
I hear it too. So I think that we need to kind of broaden the lens, if you will. The Zionist movement declared a war on the Palestinian people. And in 1948, I should say from 1947 till well into 1950, was really the very first and very aggressive push, attack against the Palestinian people to drive them out, to take their country, to wipe out their history, their monuments, their land, kick them out. Whoever stays can stay as long as they're subservient and quiet. And so they took Palestine. By beginning of 1949, most of Palestine became Israel. The world that up until 1948 referred to that country as Palestine, did commerce with Palestine, traveled to Palestine, passed international resolutions referring to Palestine, occupied Palestine, came in and out of Palestine, suddenly forgot that there was a Palestine. And from that moment on, suddenly the maps call it Israel. Suddenly people refer to it as Israel, as this new thing. Israel is it's a new thing. And so from that moment on, from that declaration of war by the Zionists against the Palestinian people, now granted, the Palestinian people have never had a military force. They've never had an army. They were subjected to a massive campaign, which began, like I said, in 1947 and goes on to this day. And it's a campaign of genocide. There's no question, because the attempt is to destroy the Palestinian people, to eliminate them. And that is
we're called animals. I know, because I was called an animal like in September before October when I met a Jewish. He asked me if I was Jewish, and he said no such animal.
They were called animals and treated as animals and invaders and primitive but for the earliest days of the 20th century. This is long before the state of Israel was established. As soon as the Zionists, this became their strategy. This became their mission. That's what they did. So they armed themselves very, very well. They kicked out close to 1 million Palestinians in 1948. Or like I said, it was a little longer than just 1948, but that was their mission. And they declared themselves to be this new country, and they were going to be the meanest and most aggressive bully in that region. And that's what they did. So then they, very shortly after the state was established, and there was what's called the ceasefire agreements between Israel and all of its neighbors. They used to be the neighbors of Palestine, by the way. They all signed agreements with the state of Israel. And then very shortly after that, Israel violated these agreements. They began incursions, military incursions. They began to take land. And then finally in 1967, so almost 20 years later, they took the rest of Palestine. So they left about 20% of Palestine, which they defined, because the Israelis defined the borders. They created this thing called the West Bank and Gaza Strip. These are not things that were there before. These are not natural boundaries. Israelis drew them. That's why the boundaries, especially in the West Bank, some of them cut through villages, like half a village ended up one side, half the other side. And then, like I said, 1967, Israel embarked on this massive assault against its Arab neighbors to take the land. They accomplished that. And ever since that moment, they were settling those other lands. I mean, for them, it's all just finishing the job of taking back what they refer to as Israel. So there's been a war against the Palestinian people going on for almost 8 decades. Palestinians have never had an army, like I said this again. They've never had a tank. They've never had a warplane or anything. They've had guerrilla fighters here and there who tried to resist militarily to this stealing of their country and the killing of their people. And ever since then, this has been the reality. So to somehow claim that the October 7 was the beginning of something is ridiculous. It's either ignorance or it's a lack of honesty. There's no third option here.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow Palestinians started here. Anything here is completely wrong. It's completely untrue.
And they are just right now, like for example, I was on the phone with a friend in the West Bank. I could hear the tach tach. I learned that word just from social media. And she said, I was trying to tell her, she speaks some English, I speak some Arabic. I'm trying to tell her about you and meeting you and what you're doing. And she said, I didn't know people talk about us like this. And I said, we're fighting for you, what do you see happening? Because they're like apparently taking over right now.
They've taken over. It's not taking over. They've taken over. Palestine has been taken over. now, so when Israel was this thing called Israel was established, they basically established an apartheid regime. So you had parts of Palestine that were people like myself were born and raised, that were really developed and built like any other Western country. And then there was the rest of Palestine. And what they did with the Palestinians is they divided them bureaucratically into different groups. So they governed different groups by different laws. So after 1948, there were a group of Palestinians that remained in what became Israel. They were this idea of an Israeli citizenship was imposed on them. They were now citizens of a state that they had nothing to do with, that they didn't want them. They were under military governorship for the first 20 years. And even though they were given a citizenship, calling it citizenship is really grotesque. It looks nothing like the citizenship of Israeli Jews. Not in terms of rights, not in terms of resources, not in terms of possibilities to grow, to live, to have freedom, in no way, shape, or form. Now, even within that realm, the Palestinians in the southern part of the country, the Naqab, the Palestinian Bedouin, are governed by another bureaucracy, which is different than the bureaucracy the people in the northern part of the country live in. Then you've got the Palestinians in Jerusalem, who have a different status.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank doesn't really exist anymore. It's just little prisons, little concentration camps throughout what used to be the West Bank. And there are highways and Israeli towns all over it. It's part of Israel. There's no West Bank. West Bank is gone. There's no such thing anymore. And then there are the Palestinian refugees outside that, again, Israel does not permit them to return. So they created the sense, okay, well, there's Gaza, then there's the West Bank, and then there's the citizens of Israel, and they're fine, and the refugees, well, what are you going to do? It's not our problem. So they created this reality in which allows them to call the shots, and they're the dominant force, and they're the ones who have the resources, and they're the ones who have the military, and they're the ones who have the industry, and the water, and the land, and they have control. And so Israel has taken over all of Palestine. That's the reality today. The good news is that Palestinians still once again make up the majority of the population. And Palestinians don't recognize these divisions that Israel created, that the apartheid regime created. Palestinians are Palestinians, and it's Palestine. That's just, for them, it's all Palestine. Whether they live in the Naqab, whether they live in Jaffa, whether they live in Haifa, it doesn't matter. Whether they live in Ramallah, it makes no difference. It's all Palestine. So again, people refer to the West Bank and Gaza as though it's a one thing, and then there's an Israel, and that's another thing. And that's a complete misconception. It's all Palestine. It's all occupied, and it all needs to be liberated from the apartheid regime. And that's the only way to end the genocide of the Palestinian people. It's a unique genocide. It's been going on for a very long time. And of course, what we're seeing now is a spike, a very dramatic spike in the killing and the displacement, what we're seeing in Gaza. And by the way, we're seeing Gaza, we're not paying attention to what's happening in the prisons where thousands of Palestinians are imprisoned and treated in the most horrific ways. We're not talking about the reality of Palestinians living in other parts of the country where the oppression and the killing it's just horrific. Palestinians are afraid to leave their homes.
True. Well, thank you. I know you are such a busy person. I did want to say thank you for the House of Freedom too. Congratulations. We got all choked up when we heard about that, and I hope to hear more. Is there anything we can do to help, support?
So, there's a wonderful video that Roger Waters put out for us recently. So it's on his Instagram. It's on my Instagram. People are welcome to watch it because it really summarizes the story very well. Because he's been, I've been thinking about this for a very long time. I've shared it with many friends, and I've got there's a whole group of Palestinian activists throughout all of Palestine who are part of it, and other Palestinians in other parts of the world, including the U.S., of course. And people like Roger Waters and others who have kind of joined us. And actually, Roger Waters has been part of the thinking process as well. He and I've been talking to him about this for a long time. So there's no representation for Palestine in Washington, D.C. Nothing. There's every flag under the sun in Washington, D.C. I mean, they're all cultural representations and
We know.
missions and all. Nothing.
No.
So we decided that, we want to create a space where, first of all, Palestine exists with a flag, with a name. So in English, it's called Palestine House of Freedom, and in Arabic, we're calling it Dar al-Hurriya. And we were given a space by a very generous Palestinian businessman in a very central part of DC, very close to the capital. And the idea is to, there's a lot of grassroots work, grassroots, activism going on now. There's a lot of NGOs, a lot of NGO work, but there's not really a space where political work is done. So the two main issues that we feel need to be pursued, and not just pursued the way we've been doing business until now, pursued in a way that we can enter the halls of power and start influencing. And these two issues are connected, and they are the way we end the violence. First one is dismantling the apartheid state and educating people that there is an apartheid state. And thankfully, 2 years ago, Amnesty International came out with a report. It's called the Apartheid Report in Palestine, and it demonstrates very clearly that from the moment the state of Israel was established, it established an apartheid regime. And apartheid is a crime against humanity. Yeah. So we have to understand that. And then we have to, on a parallel track, and I apologize, my voice is really sore today.
And you're traveling. I'm so sorry.
The other thing is how the resolution. There is a peaceful resolution staring at us. And it's a creation of a democracy with equal rights on all of historic Palestine, from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. There's no magic here. There's no other solution. There's no way to bring about peace, to end the genocide of the Palestinian people, to bring justice and a better life. This is a solution that will improve the lives of everybody who lives between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. A democracy with equal rights. That's how we end the violence. We put in mechanisms to allow the refugees to return. But we have to dismantle the apartheid state before we can do that. So these are the two issues that we feel we need to push forward very, very strongly. There's lots of ways people can help. I mean, we can talk about that. We're putting together we're still putting together a lot of the work, but we have a place. We have got a really good team of people that are working on it. We're raising funds. We're doing all these different things. And we hope to get to work, in the coming weeks to put this thing together and to end this genocide forever through a political solution that ends it forever, not some kind of ceasefire or whatever that Israel will violate. We know it will, but a political solution that ends it forever. And that's on us. I believe that's our responsibility. Anyone who is alive today, this is happening on our watch. Somebody said to me, "Do you think it'll happen in our lifetime, our children's lifetime?" I said, "You out of your mind? Yeah. It has to end now. We need to drop everything, and we need to end it now. Not a single Palestinian should be killed anymore, ever again." The reality that was created in Palestine is on our watch is inexcusable, unforgivable. We have to end it now, and it's on us to do everything we can to do that. So that's the mission. That's what we're talking about with the Palestine House of Freedom.
Miko Peled, thank you so much. And thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Miko. Follow him on YouTube, listen to his podcast, read his books, definitely. He even has some recommended books on his website and documentaries. He's doing amazing things in Washington, D.C. He recommends watching the Roger Waters video posted on social media regarding the House of Freedom, Dar al-Hurriya. We got to do something. So I just thought I would share something from the General's son that I found very moving. So here is from the General's son, and he talks about that discussion group where he friended a Palestinian or some Palestinians, but he's referring to one named Manel. So he writes, years later, after Manel's daughter was born, her father came to San Diego to visit. Gila and I went to see her. When Gila met Manel's father, It was an emotionally charged moment. They both realized they came from the same place, Majdal, now the city of Ashkelon, just a few kilometers north of Kibbutz Zikam, where Gila was born and raised. They had grown up seeing and loving the same landscape, and it affected them both deeply. Manel's father kept saying, through his tears, we were good people, and that he felt no resentment towards us. This was not your fault. Sometime later, Manel and I talked about it. This was the first time I ever saw my father cry for Palestine, she said. And I just love that because if you know, my last name is Majdali, and I too have ties to Majdal. And I thought I would share something from Injustice because he really compares the two different sides. And as he's getting to know one of the men from the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5, he talks about the differences in their stories. So he talks about the June War, the 6-Day War, which actually the Palestinians call it an el-Naksa, the setback. As I read Ghassan's vivid descriptions, I couldn't help but recall my own experience with the war. My father was a general in the IDF. Sounds of joy and victory came from our radio in Jerusalem. The jubilation of pride and destiny that once again we, the Jews, the children of King David and the Maccabees, had defeated the evil enemy. From that moment on, Ghassan and his siblings, like countless other Palestinians, were refugees with no home to return to and no country to call their own. Their father, still determined to give his sons the best education possible, decided to send him and his brothers back to boarding school in Cairo. So that is from Injustice. And I don't know, I feel sometimes in this world, some of the people they just like the spotlight and the attention. And then there's just people out there fighting the good fight with their hearts and souls. And it's just inspiring. And it's even given me strength to use my voice. When you sit with Miko, you see that he is fighting for, as he says, his Palestinian brothers and sisters. And it's truly beautiful. Please like, please share, and please keep talking about Palestine. Thank you.